This video will explain to you how to answer question 4 on the IGCSE English Language Examination. Now I've already done a video which explains questions 1, 2 and 3. They are worth 11 marks, so this is where the exam paper starts to get a little more challenging, a little more difficult, but because of that the amount of marks on offer increase. So this one is worth 12 marks, and the first thing to say following on from the last video is for questions 4 and 5, please give them time. Don't spend lots of time trying to perfect questions 1, 2 and 3 just for the sake of 1 or 2 extra marks when you've got 12 and then 22 marks available for questions 4 and 5. So there's one key skill that you need to demonstrate and that the markers are looking for question 4, and that is analysis. And I'll come back to the idea of the microscope, as you can see, a little later on. So here's the mark scheme for you. 12 marks, very simple, always in 5 levels. And you can see at the top here, there's just one skill, one assessment objectives available. So understand and analyse how writers use linguistic and structural devices to achieve their effects. So you're not just commenting on the words that writers use, the language, the linguistic side, you're also commenting on the structure. And the structure is all about how the text is organised. So language is words, structure is how are those words organised. Again, more on that later. So to do this at an okay standard, to do this clearly, not blowing anyone away, but doing pretty well, would be level 3. So you clearly explain how writers use words and structure to achieve effects, and you use decent quotations. If you do that a lot, then you move into thorough. So thorough means you've done it in a detailed way, you've covered lots of points. The last level is perceptive, which is obviously what we are aiming for. So this is where what you're actually saying, you haven't just done a lot of it, but what you're saying, the quality of it is really, really good. You've been able to go into great depth. You've been able to show really... Perception means you're able to explain things that aren't immediately obvious about why that word has been used. And I'll show you some examples of how to get that perceptive understanding in your answer later on. So, back to basics. Question 4, what is it going to be about? So, it will always be on text 2 in the exam. So, you'll be given 2 texts. Text 1 is for questions 1, 2 and 3. Text 2 is for question 4. And then both of them will be question 5. And as I said, this is assessed for just AO2, just analysing, that skill of analysis. Now, I mentioned in the last video that some people fall into a trap of trying to analyse in questions 2 and 3 after they've quoted. You don't need to, because this question tests that skill. And as it says, this is what the exam board say, it's more challenging, so therefore it's worth more marks. This is how it will look when you complete the examination. And the good thing about this exam is it's always structured in the same way. Question 4 will always be written in this way. No matter what the text is, it could be any one of those 10 texts from your first part of the anthology that you will have covered with your teacher. This year, the year of the exam that I've picked is The Explorer's Daughter, and then that becomes text 2 in the booklet you were given in the exam. So how does the writer use language and structure too? The question always has that starter, so you know exactly what to prepare for. So revision for the English language exam isn't like learning lots of content. You don't need to learn quotations from every 10 texts, from every one of the 10 texts, because you are given it. But what you can revise is, okay, so when question 4 appears and it's language and structure, how do I approach it? What do I need to do? How do I get that level of analysis in my answer? What paragraph structures do I use? How long do I spend on it? So revision for English is very much kind of the skills and the technique. Anyway, you will always be given a focus to base your answer on. So this time it's how do her thoughts and feelings, how are they communicated about watching the hunt? So I would highlight that phrase. That's what we call topic X. That will change every time. So it will always be how writers use language and structure, but they will give you a different topic every time, just to give you some focus, just to give you something to work towards, rather than just analyse language. They're giving you a purpose to analyse that language for. And they always give you this reminder, use quotations, including, back up your answer including brief quotations. So make sure those quotations are as short as you need them to be. You don't need to waste time writing out a whole sentence if you only need 2 words from that sentence. And the better you quote, the more marks you'll get as well. Here's some advice from the examiners, from the examiner's report, which is a really helpful resource to use. I've just taken out the most relevant parts to you as a student about to take this exam. So some candidates will spend a little too long on an introduction that sets out what they intended to do, and a conclusion that summed up what they had done, neither of which contributed usefully to the acquisition of marks, and time could have been spent more wisely by starting with an immediate focus on the use of language or structure. So you probably, as a student, in good habits, you know that essays should have an introduction and conclusion, but this isn't an essay, this is an English language examination answer. You do not need an introduction, you do not need a conclusion. Never start an exam, no matter whether it's this question or an essay, with I am going to analyse the language and structure, or the writer uses language and structure in many ways. That's a pointless sentence, that's a waste of 15 to 20 seconds. Instead, start straight away, immediately, analysing language or structure. And what do the best candidates do? They analyse structure in depth. So lots of people getting level 4 out of 5, I imagine, they will analyse language. They'll make 1 or 2 structure points, but they won't do it as well. Structure is more difficult to learn, it is more difficult to teach. Students are obviously going to be much stronger on analysing language. So what you can do is make sure that you know how to analyse structure. For example, paragraph lengths. Why is that paragraph so short in comparison to all the others? What did the writer want to achieve from doing that? Why does the writer leave that part until the very end, like Adichie? Why does she leave that last line to the last line? Why doesn't she put that halfway in the middle of her speech, for example? How is juxtaposition used? So, for example, in The Explorer's Daughter, we have the majestic animals against the fast-moving, bumbling humans who are scrambling about. That juxtaposition makes the animals seem even more elegant and graceful. And that's what it says here. There's juxtaposition between the beauty of the animal and the ruthlessness of its killing. Now, the advantage for you guys is that you won't have to come up with that idea on the spot in the exam. You will hopefully have remembered that from your revision on each of these 10 texts. So you've gone through them in class or through home learning. There's lots of videos available online. There's a few from myself on this channel, and there's lots available from other teachers online as well that you can access. So you should have access to these points. You've just got to make sure that you remember to use these better language and structure points in the actual exam. So that counts on your revision, really, making sure that you know from each of the 10 texts, okay, if it was single story, if it was between a rock and a hard place, what are like the 6 to 8 top language and structure points that I will need to remember to make when I have an answer in the exam. And of course, as long as that relates back to whatever it is in the question. Thoughts and feelings, well, a writer only ever talks about their thoughts and feelings, really. So that's a nice vague question that gives you lots to write about. So, and just another note here, just building from that last point I made, examiners noted that some candidates did not focus on the thoughts and feelings. So that's just a disclaimer. Make sure that when you're analysing that you are actually making it relevant to the topic in the question. So even though they've given you quite an open question, thoughts and feelings, most of the text is about her thoughts and feelings. You've got to make sure that each kind of topic sentence in your paragraph links back to a particular thought or feeling. So some people went off track a little bit, talked about the hunters, the families, the narwhals. And as the examiner says, while some of it was good, while some of the points were interesting, that wasn't the question we actually asked. You could do the most brilliant analysis of a part of the text, but if it's not actually what they've asked you to do, you won't get any marks for it. Now, here's the full text. So this is just something I did with my students in year 10. So for language and structure, you've got to make sure that you are using the idea of the microscope. To analyse, you don't just talk about the whole text, you don't just talk about one whole paragraph, but you need to really zoom in and with your microscope Imagine you're looking at the whole paragraph, then you've used the microscope and you're now seeing and focusing on individual words, like the word methodically. What does that specifically tell us? Why did the writer bother to include that word? They didn't have to. It's there for a reason. They've redrafted this piece of writing a lot. That word has stayed in there. So why? What's the effect they want to create by using that particular word? Or, for example, the evening light was butter gold. What could that reflect about her thoughts and feelings about the animals and the situation? Obviously, it's going to be positive, and then you take it from there. But that's the idea. So once you see what the question is, you go through with your highlighter and you highlight these interesting words that relate to the the person's thoughts and feelings. And once you've found a good one, like methodically, you ask yourself that question: why? Why did the writer use that particular word? What is it that they're trying to achieve? And I'll give you some more advice later on how to make that a perceptive answer. So, the paragraph structure you should use is as follows. So you shouldn't just write unstructured analysis. You need to give your answer that structure, that clarity. So the paragraph structure has 3 parts to it. You have your what point, then you have the where, and then the how and the why. So rather than start with a technique, start with an idea. So don't start with the writer uses repetition. Answer the question. The question is about the writer's thoughts and feelings. So I would start my paragraph with a thought or a feeling. The writer presents a sense of admiration for the animals, or for the narwhal. Okay, the examiner's going to be asking you, because obviously the question is thoughts and feelings, use quotations. They're going to be asking you in their head, all right, prove it. Where does the writer show admiration for the narwhal, for the animals? Where is this idea clear in the text? Give me a quotation. The use of the word methodically, and then why. How does that word methodically prove she admires them? Why did she use that word methodically? So do you see how those 2 questions, I'm using them in my head to come up with my analysis? So how does methodically prove her admiration? How does butter gold prove her admiration? But why that word specifically? What effect and impact does it have on the reader? And obviously, I always say this to my students, so imagine you're a lawyer. You don't just bring along one piece of evidence to prove that you are correct. You bring more than one. So this is how the paragraph structure actually works in practice. So you start off with a clear idea, so the writer creates a sense of admiration towards the narwhal. This is clear through this quotation, majestically. The use of the word majestically suggests that the animals are moving very slowly and elegantly, which makes us understand that the writer is praising them and admiring them and is in awe of them. Furthermore, the fact she uses this word and then you pick another word and you analyse that in the same detail. So that's how you get perceptive. That's how you get at least level 4, by not just using one quotation to back up your idea, but by adding detail, by making it more thorough. See how I'm quoting the mark scheme, thorough, to make it even more detailed. And if you're able to do both of those green sections in detail and with really specific analysis, then the more likely you are to be moving into that level 5. And so how long should this paragraph be? So your topic sentence should always be 1 sentence. Your quotation should always be maximum 1 sentence. You might even be able to blend those 2 together to make it into 1 sentence. But how long should the analysis be? Well, if you're using this colour coding system, the green section should be the most prominent part of your paragraph, because that's the most important bit. That's where you analyse, in the green section. So that is what's worth most marks. So that's what you need to be spending most of your time on. So, so I now know that I need to analyse words. I know that I need to analyse structure. I know that I need to do a what, where, how and why paragraph. But how do I make that green section of the paragraph as strong as possible? Imagine you're analysing. So imagine this is your quotation. I see this quite a lot, especially lower down the school. We regain a kind of paradise. This quotation shows that Adichie is motivating the audience. That is clear. That is level 3 at most. That is not thorough. That is not perceptive. And again, we regain a kind of paradise. This suggests that it'll be better in the future if we embrace different stories. That's slightly better. than the first example, but both of them, they don't actually analyse specific words. So you're not getting any actual marks for analysing language and structure. You're just explaining what she's doing. And so this is a key technique. Lots of students will put a full stop after the quotation and then they'll go, this quotation shows, or this suggests. Do you see how I'm talking about there, the whole quotation? I'm not being very specific in explaining which specific word creates that sense of motivation, or how a certain word creates the sense it will be better in the future. So that's what you need to do. Pick one specific word to comment on, and I would go for the most interesting one, and that would obviously be here, paradise. So how about this? So imagine that person, they followed my advice. Rather than talking about the whole quotation in one go, this suggests, they've done one word instead. So the use of the metaphor paradise reflects that, and then they've used their connotation. So what does paradise suggest to me? Well, it's a place full of happiness and joy and equality and serenity. Okay, so paradise reflects that a sense of peace and equality can be gained if we hear different stories. And then on to the impact. So what does that make the reader do? Which helps the audience become motivated to reject dangerous and false stories of prejudice. And that is perceptive, that's level 5. So just by focusing on one word, the writing has automatically become much more specific, much more precise, much more thorough, and if you've done it well, much more perceptive. And you can see how I've split my analysis here into two colours. This is the effect. This is what the word suggests to me, the effect of it, and this is the impact. This is what it's actually done to me as a reader. Now, so lots of people will stop after the green bit. They will tell me what the word suggests using their connotations. But then this is a technique I came up with a few years ago after teaching the OCR specification. So you need to think about, okay, what is that specific impact on the reader? And this will make it even more perceptive. So you always start off with the use of the word paradise, suggests, reflects, indicates. But then you create this second clause, which helps the reader to, does it help us understand something about the speaker? Does it help us learn something about their situation? Does the use of verbs in between a rock and a hard place make us understand the delicate movements, that careful nature of how the movements need to be in order to stay on the rock? Does the use of paradise help us visualise a much better future? Does the writer's use of the word paradise make us feel motivated to read and embrace different stories in the future? So there's 3 ideas there. You don't need to do all 3 in one go. You pick the best one. So when you analyse a word, this is a really good level 5 technique to bring you up to level 5 of the mark scheme. So once you've analysed the word, as I've said, what does that do? What does that make me think? Okay, I'm not quite sure. Does it make me picture something? Maybe not, but does it make me feel something instead? So you pick the most relevant example. Most of them will be, what does it make us realise? What does that make us think? And there's 4 different ways you can say that, so you're not just saying all the time, which helps the reader understand. So pick the best one that's available to your point. And here is a paragraph that you can use as a guide and a model to write your own. Now, do you see this green and purple section? Do you see how that's the most prominent part of the paragraph? That's where the analysis is coming in. So obviously, I'm spending most of the time on the analysis. So this, and here's a checklist to help you as well. So you can write that down on a flashcard and revise that before you go into the examination and keep that in your head. And you'll do really well on this question. So imagine if the question is about thoughts and feelings. What's one thought and feeling you've got? Give it me in your topic sentence. Then you do a very specific quotation. Then do you see how I'm picking up on a specific word from that quotation, the word shift, and then I don't waste any time. These 12 marks for analysis, so I'm going to do as much analysis as I can. Straight away, I'm immediately analysing that word shift, what it suggests to me, and now I'm adding level 5 perception by explaining how it impacts the reader, what it makes me understand about that situation. And because I want to get level 5, I'm not just using one quotation, but I'm introducing a second quotation, and then I'm analysing, once again, that's the most interesting word, and then I'm using the impact point after my connotation analysis to push me on to level 5. Now, both of these are language points. In another paragraph, I would need to do a language, then a structure analysis. It's quite simple, really. It's exactly the same approach, but rather than commenting on the use of the metaphor or the use of the noun, instead, you will talk about the use of the repetition, the use of the juxtaposition instead. And so there you go, folks. That is how to answer question 4 in the examination. So key messages. Well, first of all, revise the 10 texts from part A of your anthology. That is definitely, one of those is definitely going to be based on what question 4 will be based on in the exam. Read the question carefully. If it asks about thoughts and feelings, then make sure you are always analysing thoughts and feelings. Don't waste any time by creating an introduction and conclusion. Stick to the paragraph structure, clear point, 2 quotations, and then the better you analyse those quotations, the more specific, the more precise, the more thoughtful you are, the more marks you are going to get. And make sure you've got a good balance of language and structure too, and that should create the perfect answer and help you get, hopefully, at least 11, if not 12 out of 12 marks. Thanks for listening. Hope that helps. Best of luck in the upcoming examinations.